On page 31, the title there says, Rise, Go Where I Will Show You. In 1960, God said, Rise from high fields, quickly go away. I wept not knowing where to go. But he said, Rise, go to Bindura, a very primitive area. No one will trouble you. I will make my work grow through you. Now, we have to first and foremost understand that whilst we take time to read the history book, to share about the history of our Father, in as much as it is to remind us about where we have come from and where we are going, it is also very important for us to remember that every account of history is beneficiary for our learning. We take lessons, we learn, we get inspiration from the accounts of history. Actually, in the book of Romans chapter 15, maybe I can read that. Romans chapter 15 verse 4, NIV version, it says, For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we may have hope. You see that? So when we read history, when we read the accounts of what our Father went through, what this church has gone through in the past, according to Apostle Paul here, he says these accounts of history, they are written, number one, to teach us. Through these accounts, we get lessons. If we can follow the footsteps that our Father walked, if we take lessons from his experiences and encounters, we can apply the same in our lives and have results. So Paul says here, they were written, number one, to teach us, and number two, that through them we may have endurance, because they provide a hope for us. So in summary, we can say the accounts of history that is written is number one, for the purpose of teaching, and number two, for inspiration, for inspiring us. Now we are seeing an account here. In 1960, God comes to our father, Dr. Ezekiel Guti, and he says to him, Rise from high fields, go to Bindura, a very primitive place. I can remind you that at this particular time in 1960, our father, the seventh apostle of God, was already a preacher. If you read your history well, you will realize that by this time he had already purchased the house in Highfields, the cottage 593. He was already established in Highfields, already ministering as an ordained minister at that particular time. But God comes to him and says, now leave Highfields. Let's go to Bindura. The account here shows us very clearly that this was not a very easy move for our father. Because the book says here, I wept. It was not comfortable. It was not easy. Why? Because number one, he is moving from an area where he's already set up. He already has a home. He already has his family there. They are already settled. And number two, God is already using him mightily in that area. And history tells us that he's already quite known in the circles of the ministries and fellowships that he was associating with. But God comes with an instruction and says, leave that area. Let's go to Bindura. When we look at this situation or at this circumstance with the eyes of the flesh, and we try to reason and analyze it, we can quickly conclude that if God really wanted to start a church with the men of God and have it grow, the best place to have started it was obviously in Highfields. Why? Because Highfields, it's a high density suburb. There are already lots of people there. It will be easier to gather following, to gather momentum, to gather people in Highfields. Not just that, this is a place where Ezekiel is already familiar. He knows the systems. He knows every corner of this place. Why is God taking him out to go to a primitive place where he is not familiar with? And he says, I want to start my work with you there. The lesson that we learn here, number one, is that when God commands or instructs us to do something, it may not make sense in the natural, but we have to obey God's instruction. We are learning lessons from history. When we look at the situation, it might not make sense when God gives an instruction or a command. Leave Highfields. Let's go to Bindura, a very small town. I want to start the work there. Lord, why are you not starting here? Where I already have somewhere to stay. I already have resources. I already have some people whom I know here. Why are you not starting here? God, when he speaks to us, when he instructs us to do something, many a times it does not make physical sense, but it takes obedience to what God has said to see results in our lives. So the lesson that we get, the first thing that we get from this lesson here is no matter how it feels, no matter how things look, it always pays when we obey God. It might not be comfortable, it might not be easy, it might not be exciting, it might not be fun, but when we choose to obey God, even if it might not be making sense to us, but when we choose to obey God, it will pay us back a great deal in the long run. In the moment when God has spoken, it might not make sense. Look here, our father said, I wept. You see, when we are reading the history book these days, when we talk about this history, for us, when we read it, when we talk about it, we read it with a better understanding because already we have seen the results of what he has gone through. But don't forget that when the man of God was going through these things, when he was going through all these difficult times, being instructed by God to do, the results were not yet there. So it was obedience, purely obeying and trusting God without knowing for sure what is going to happen. At this particular time, there was no church in any other country, no, not even in any city. It was pure obedience to God. And we see 64 years later, in 169 nations and states, God has taken that small seed that started in Bindura under a gum tree to spread it all across the world. What does it teach us? It teaches us that many times when God instructs us to do some things, when God instructs us to obey him, it might not be comfortable at that particular time. But when we choose to obey him, overlooking our own feelings, our own thoughts, our own ideas, when we choose to obey God, we have placed ourselves at a place where God can now work wonders with us. Oh yes, the lesson here is choose to obey God in all circumstances. You see, God might not come to you and I and instruct us the same way that he did our father to say, okay, leave where you are going, go there for my work. He might not come at that magnitude. But in our own capacities, God instructs us to obey him in some level. In the way that we run our homes as husband and wife, there is a way that God says a home must be run this way. When we choose to obey that way that God says, this is the way a home must function, we are obeying God. In the way we handle and manage our finances as individuals, as families, as couples, there is a way that God says this is the way to handle and manage your finances. You might not feel like doing as God said. You might not feel like this is the best idea. But choosing to obey what God says over what you feel or over what other people think. Just as we see in the history with our father here, that when you obey God, you have given God a platform for him to work miracles and wonders in your own life. Oh yes, we can rightfully say every step of obedience that you take as a child of God, it's a step towards a more fulfilling and rewarding life. When God instructs you to forgive, to love, to do whatever he says, sometimes it might feel like, no, I'm being taken for granted. Like if we are going to look in this case, when our father is being asked here, go to Highfield, go to Bindura, leave Highfields. If he was going to look at himself and look at his peers, look at those around his age who were probably working at the same workplace, he might feel like, no, I'm going backwards. I thought I was making progress. I thought I was moving ahead. But now God is telling me to go to the rural area, to go to a small town. This is going backwards. But according to God, obeying him is already putting you at a place of advantage. Oh yes. We can rightfully say, obeying God in anything, obeying God is putting yourself ahead of the game in any area. When you choose to obey God, it may seem as if you have stepped behind, you have gone backwards, you have regressed, you are wayward, you are not up to speed with what is happening today. It may feel like that, or it may seem like that in the physical. But I can guarantee you that every act of obedience to God, you are putting yourself ahead. Why? Why do I say so? Because remember, God sees and knows all things. God sees and knows all things. So when he instructs you to take a certain path or to take a certain road, he knows definitely what is ahead of that road. You don't know. When he asks you that move this way, and you are looking another way that is seeming to be promising, that looks like this one is more glorious, this is more comfortable, God knows that road is not going anywhere. Take this one that seems despised, that seems as if it's not going anywhere. Take this road. God knows that within 100 meters you will see a highway. God knows. So choose to obey him. Choose to obey his voice. One of the things that we must learn as dear children of God is walking in obedience to God. Remember, Apostle Paul in the book of Corinthians says the carnal mind is enmity with God. The flesh cannot please God. When we want to walk with God, we walk with him in the realm or in the space of obedience. God always, every day, is commanding us, is instructing us something. Every day, God is instructing us something. How you love people, how you handle yourself, how you respond to what people are doing to you. God is telling you how to respond every day. He's telling you, no, do it this way. But many a times we are adamant. We say, no, me, I want to do it this way. I will not do, people will not treat me like that. I will handle this situation this way. But as long as we choose to handle situations, circumstances, affairs of our lives in our own way, in our own thinking, in our own comforts, be rest assured that you are walking in the flesh. You are walking by yourself. Oh yes. Is it easy? No. Is it comfortable? No. It's painful. Read the history book. The book said he wept. He said, why now? Why leaving Highfields? Why? He wept. But after the weeping, he obeyed. He obeyed. And see where we are today. These are the results of a man who chose to obey God even when it was painful, even when it was hard. Now we are saying in this season, the legacy must continue. But what causes the legacy to continue? It's not just you and I talking about it. No, it's also you and I walking in the same steps that he walked. Steps of obedience, choosing to obey God more than the flesh, choosing to obey God more than my feelings, choosing to obey God more than what social media is saying, choosing to obey God more than what the world is saying, choosing to take the word of God as it is and go for it. The encouragement tonight on lessons from history is obedience pays in the long run. Obedience to God pays in the long run. May the Lord God bless you.